We won't.
But now this is good for you people that are outside of Israel, because it happened that this year that the Rebbe spoke this speech, which is 1991, it was something like this year, how the calendar worked out. So this week by you is Parshat Korach, but this the speech that the Rebbe gave is speaking more about the date than it is the Torah portion, but the Torah portion is relevant any all time. So here we have, this week is the first day of Tammuz, the month of Tammuz. The month of Tammuz, a lot of big miracles happen, but especially they happen to the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, he was put into prison on the 15th day of Sivan, and a little bit short of 1 month later, on the 13th of Tammuz, he was totally released from prison. And so I think we've talked about this before, but a little bit sort of history about what happened over here. This is 1927. Stalin had assumed power of the Communist Party. I think, what's his name? Lenin died in 25, I think. Oh, I looked it up once. And just 1 second, 1 second. Let me just look this up one more time, just so that I remember it. As far as I remember, he died in 1925. Give me a second over here. Give me one moment. Why is it not working for me? Oh, here it is. Here he is. Died 24. He died in 1924, right in the beginning of 1920, January 1924. Okay, so then Stalin took over, and Stalin was really like starting to, put the clamps down on everybody in Russia. Which, I mean, maybe now is the time to say it, maybe it's not. But communism is a system that has the most beautiful, sayings and slogans, and there's another word for it also, but I can't think of it. Anyway, beautiful slings about love and brotherhood and peace and provision, economic success, and everyone will work according to their ability and receive according to their needs, and that they'll be just care. People will care for one another, and there won't be any more class differences in those evil capitalists. It's going on now. I mean, this whole woke movement is all based on this idea also. And then the World Forum and the new order, or new world order, and all these things. And the ideas of communism are just so rosy and so beautiful, and especially the Jews. The Jews loved these ideas. They were just ardent communists. You had Trotsky and these people. And in Israel, they had kibbutzim, that they were based on firm communist ideals, and the picture of Stalin was on the wall. Really, seriously, Stalin was on the wall. And they killed I don't know, tens of millions of people. They say that Mao Zedong killed like 100 million people, and Stalin killed like 50 million people. And there was this guy, Pot Paul, whatever it is, in Cambodia. He killed a few million people. I don't know how many people they are. I mean, it's like pale in comparison to Mao Zedong. But everywhere, basically, that it was communism with their beautiful ideas, and they just robbed the people, and there was poverty everywhere, everywhere. Venezuela was maybe the best example. That they says that it was forbidden. So many people were dying. It was forbidden for the hospitals to list the cause of death as hunger. Nobody died of hunger, but there were people who were dying from hunger like flies, and it was all because of communism. They put in communism, immediately failed. Anyway, in order to implement this communism, it's so beautiful and it's so wonderful, and it's going to, so anybody obviously opposing it is an enemy of mankind, is an enemy of of all things. So it's a big, wonderful thing to get rid of them. And so Stalin got rid of everybody that not only was against him, that he thought might be against him, and another few. And everybody believed that Stalin was some sort of a genius, and who knows what, a tremendous leader, that he knew who was going to. He cared so much about the people that he had to even kill all these people in order to purify and get rid of the disease. Anyway, so the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe became one of them. He defied Stalin, not openly, but certainly clandestinely, and he set up schools, underground schools all over, to teach Torah. And we talked about this before. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe said that I don't care if I lose this world or I lose the world to come. I don't care. Jewish children are going to learn the Torah. And eventually he was caught. A lot of his Hasidim, Chabad, they were caught and they were murdered. A lot of them were murdered. A lot of them died in Siberia. And he was taken to prison on the 15th day of Sivan and was supposed to have been executed that very night. That was the plan. Who put him into prison? Jews that were against Judaism, called the Yevsektia. In the end, Stalin wiped all of them also. He had them all killed also. But there were several hundred, several thousand. I don't know how many were there, but there were a sufficient number that they made a lot of trouble for Jews everywhere, everywhere in Russia. Anyway, so the Rebbe was taken into prison and he was sentenced to death. Miraculously, he was not killed. There was some sort of a mix-up on the first night, and they couldn't sort of get the papers together to reassign a date for him to be killed. So they said, okay, they'll put him into exile for 10 years. And then finally, they decided 3 years, they'll put him into exile. And they took him out of prison and sent him into exile. That was on the 3rd day of Tammuz. They sent him into exile. Nobody knew what was going on. There were a few people that knew that this was the beginning of the redemption. On the 12th day of Tammuz, the Rebbe was told he was free. On the 13th day of Tammuz, he got his official papers because the 12th day was some sort of a holiday, some communist holiday or something. So so they got the papers on the 13th and he got freed, totally freed. But the 3rd day of Tammuz, that was really the day that everything turned around. Before that, he was in prison. They tortured him. They beat him up and they tortured him. And he was totally in their hands. Anybody could come just to, and kill him at any moment. There was just nothing stopping them. And miraculously, it didn't happen. Even though that he writes in his memoirs that he heard the whole night how they were taking people out of their cells and shooting them. And he hears screams and yells and then a shot and then silence. The whole night they were just taking people out of the. And miraculously, somehow or other, he was not killed. And that's this holiday that's the 3rd day of Tammuz. The 3rd day of Tammuz is also the day that, several thousand years earlier, Joshua made the sun stand still when he was defeating the city of Jericho, Yericho. 3rd day of Tammuz, same date. So the Rebbe is going to center around this date. And then you have to understand something, that, the evil of communism is the depth of evil. I don't think there's anything more evil than communism on one hand. On the other hand, the appeal of communism, I don't know if there's anything more appealing than communism is to the intellectual mind or whatever. Inflame the minds of everybody over there. Stalin was killing people right and left, and everybody still believed him. They still believed in this, that it was going to work, communism was going to work, and there was world communism, and this communism was going to work, it was going to free the world. Right? And anyone who was vaguely against it was the enemy, not just of communism or of Russia, of all mankind. He was going to. So the appeal of it is so great because it touches on something in the soul, in everybody's soul, the desire for justice, desire for truth, the desire for equality on one hand, and on the other hand, the desire to rule, to be cruel, right? You have the opportunity to hate anyone who opposes you, right? You're justified 100% to hate him because you're not hating. You're hating somebody. It's like everyone who is against you. They're like a disease. It's like hating, tuberculosis or something like that. But you have to do everything you can to get rid of it. Polio, anything you can to get rid of polio. Right? It was paralyzing children. You get rid of it. The same thing as any of the capitalists and the religious, anyone who's against communism so it appeals to all the aspects of human personality. On one hand, love for all mankind. On the other hand, power, hatred to anybody who's against you. And this, the previous Rebbe single-handedly stood against Stalin, single-handedly. And he won. And the Rebbe said that's the reason that the Iron Curtain fell, because of the crack that the previous Rebbe put in this seemingly impenetrable wall and penetrable wall of of hatred and bigotry. There's no bigotry with anyone who's not a communist. You hate him. And just destruction and death. It was just pure death, right? In the end, I mean, it would have succeeded if communism would have succeeded, the economic system would have succeeded, then everything Stalin would have done would have been justified, and Mao Zedong was justified. But the fact is, it didn't. That's what defeated it. That people simply they didn't have what to eat. The whole thing wasn't working, and it didn't work anywhere. The system itself, it implodes on itself. That's why I say, and people disagree with me, then 100%. No one has to agree with me. But if people disagree with themselves, it shows that they themselves are destroying themselves. It's obviously that they're wrong. Obviously that they're wrong. They themselves say that. Okay, let's go. So what's the antidote to this? The antidote is the previous Rebbe. And what's the previous Rebbe trying to teach us? Like we learned before, faith. You have to have faith in the creator of the universe, that he's creating us every moment from love, and that he wants us to do with ourselves, which is a creation of his, what he wants, but we have to do it from our own free will. And when you do what's true from your own free will, the result is happiness. You're doing something infinitely meaningful, ultimately meaningful, and the result is happiness. That's why it says in the Tanya that Abraham, and taking his son to sacrifice him, right, that he did it with happiness, because it was what God told him to do, even though it was against everything that Abraham stood for. Abraham stood for life and for success and for easing the troubles of people and to feeding the sick and providing for the poor. Abraham, all these things he did actually. And now God is telling us to take his beloved, super beloved son that the whole future depends on, the carrying out, and to kill him. And everything, to do what you want, God, I'll do whatever you want. I know it's going to be good. So the result of it is happiness to do what God wants. And that's what kept the previous Rebbe alive in prison. He was happy, even though it was terrible suffering all the time, but he was happy, and he knew that he was doing exactly what God wanted. He was standing against communism and suffering for it. And in the end, he won. By communism, at least in Russia, it failed. They're trying to revive it again, but it's not good. Not in Russia. They're not trying. Okay, Gimmel Tammuz, the third day of Tammuz, Hu Hayom. This is the day that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe was freed, Mimaser, from his imprisonment in Beit Asurim, in the prison. He was freed from prison, but he was sent into exile. But in prison, he was totally under their control. The prison was called Sparlerka in Leningrad. I saw it. I didn't go inside. I saw it. But Tanai, on the condition that he would go immediately into exile in the city of Kar Stromar. And the other places they stayed there in Kar Stromar for 3 years. Okay, the fact of the matter is that the Rebbe was freed and that he refused to leave, because he was freed on like 2 days before Shabbat. And he realized that if he would travel on the train, he would have to travel on Shabbat. He would arrive there on Shabbat. And he refused, because he didn't want them to think, and even though it was totally permissible, but he didn't want the non-Jews to think that they in any way would cause him, even if it was totally right, according to the Torah, because it was dangerous for him to stay in the prison. He didn't want them to think that they had any rulership over him or over the Shabbat. And so he stayed. He said he refused to leave. And they actually let him stay there until the third day of Tammuz. Right? I mean, it's really quite incredible. So the third day of Tammuz, that's where he got out. B'shayato, in the time when they freed the Rebbe, now none of the Hasidim knew what was going on. They didn't know what was happening with him. They didn't know if he was dead or alive. And the time, Adayin Lo Yadu, they didn't know if it was freed or not. All of a sudden, they heard the Rebbe was alive and that he was freed to go to exile. So they didn't know, is this a good thing or not a good thing? And they wanted the Rebbe to come back. All of a sudden, they say he's not coming back. He's sent into exile. Well, that's terrible. That's not good. They didn't know. Other people said, no, that's good. They didn't know what's going to come out of it. Kivan Shagam, She'ir Miklat, even though the city of his exile was a easier imprisonment, Beit Asurim, than being actually in prison. Afal became nevertheless, Harizu Galutit, nevertheless is exile with all of the limitations that are implied by exile. He couldn't go where he wanted to. He couldn't do what he wanted to. He just had a bigger prison. That's all. He was in a bigger, it was in a town instead of being in a dayim. But nevertheless, materis a sakana noseris a sakana. There remains a danger. Sheyochlim li hitcharet, that the Russians could say, let's take and put him back into prison. He still was not free. But afterwards, on the 12th day of Tammuz, as he received, when he was in Kostromar, he received the announcement. He received the news that they were releasing him. But to that hachofesh, and the actually deed, the certificate that he was freed was given on the 13th day at Yud Gimmel Tammuz. Then, when he was freed, then Nitkaleh, was revealed that the 3rd day of Tammuz was really the beginning of his redemption. In addition to the fact that he went out from the Beit Asurim, he went out from prison, and he went to a city of exile, which is an easier sort of a imprisonment. Was known that fact that he was sent into this Kastromar came in the place of death. Nobody knew what was going on. Sending him to this city of exile, this meant that the punishment of death had been rescinded. God forbid. There was beforehand, it was decided that they were going to kill him. And they decided finally, once and for all, that they weren't going to kill him. Davar Shaya, B'mamad, Sakana, V'nogea, Rahman Natzlan, the call him Shecha'inyan, the Harpatzas Torah, V'chizuk Yadus, B'chlal. Okay, you have to understand something over here. The same thing with Abraham. If Abraham would have really killed Yitzchak, like God commanded him to do, at the last moment, God sent this angel to tell him not to. But if he would have done it, that would have been the end of Judaism. I mean, God would have made a new Abraham or something. But at the time, Abraham was 137 years old. He was not going to give birth. The fact that he gave birth to Yitzchak when he was 100 years old, that was a big enough miracle. But that, I mean, according to any sort of logic, even holy logic, as killing your son, that's the end of it. God is going to have to start over from the beginning. It was the same thing with the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe was the only Jew in the world that said that every Jew has to be woken up. And if all the Jewish people are woken up to Judaism, then the whole world will be woken up to the creator of the world. The world will be a wonderful place. He was the only man in the whole world that even said this. And not only that, he had tremendous opposition, but his main opposition was communism, the biggest anti-God force in the world. And they were all against him, concentrated on this one man, this one person. Now, if they would have gotten what they wanted to, which by them getting what they wanted to was just pulling a trigger, there was no problem to it. If they would have gotten what they wanted, then that would have been it. It was like Abraham. God would have had to make a new Abraham. Okay, God can do anything he wants to, but according to any sort of normal logic, and we're supposed to live our lives according to logic as much as possible, as that would have been it. So all the time that he was in prison, anyone who wanted to could have just come and just put an end to his life. That was the business of the place. That's everyone was doing. Right? It was a slaughterhouse. And for a chicken to avoid slaughter when he's on the line, it just doesn't happen. Even if he runs away a little bit, so they catch him and they bring him back to the line, they just let him go. And the Rebbe was literally by them just like an animal waiting for slaughter. It was just another chunk of meat. And when the Rebbe got out of prison, nobody knew what was happening. But the fact is that he was out of the realm of death. They changed his sentence right? They could have easily said, listen, we tried to kill him one time and got messed up. We'll do it now, right? You just make the order, right? Kill him, and that's it. It can be done in a second. But it wasn't. In fact, it wasn't. And instead, he was sent out into exile, which this, but Tammuz, instead of this, Kelu, they made the punishment a lot less until that this brought to the fact that he eventually got freed on Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz. In general, part of this miracle was set, this day was set, B'Chag Geula, the day of freedom. Now, just one more thing. Now, the previous Rebbe, he knew that if he would have been killed, then that would have been it, right? He would have been killed. His daughter had not gotten married yet. The previous our Rebbe now had not been officially chosen to be the Rebbe. He wasn't in the family, so to speak. He wasn't. Everybody knew he was a great person, but he on his own would have never accepted to be the Rebbe alone, to be chosen from the, because he got married to the Rebbe's daughter, as therefore he was. The Rebbe, previous Rebbe, showed him tremendous the love and this, and they saw his greatness, and so he became the Rebbe. But if the Rebbe would have gotten killed, then that would have pretty much put a stop to the whole thing, just like Abraham, right? But the Rebbe willfully put himself into danger. He refused to do what they said. They said, just sign on these papers, we'll let you go. He refused to sign. Right? The smallest, he refused to give them any recognition whatsoever. He said he made a decision that I'm going to treat them as though they don't exist whatsoever. his captors, and he didn't pay any attention to them. Every moment he was putting himself into danger. But nevertheless, to somebody in the world has to be willing to sacrifice everything from the truth. There has to be somebody. And if he would have compromised on the truth, so he would have been like everybody else. Everyone else is compromising on the truth to some degree, in the face of death for sure. There has to be one person in the world that's not willing to compromise truth. And that's what the Rebbe was. That's what Abraham was. Because of this, this day was set for a day of redemption. And the question can be asked, a very simple question. Peshuta, since that this redemption, the release of the previous Rebbe from communist prison was a miracle from God, and therefore we have to praise God for his kindness, and his miracles for all mankind. Because the Gimmel Tammuz, the third day of Tammuz, was a big miracle. This is the day that the Rebbe was decided officially the Rebbe was not going to be killed. So why wasn't it revealed in the beginning? Shagu'ula Shlema, that the complete redemption came at one time, right? Yud Gimel Tammuz, they should have just let the Rebbe free immediately. So it would have been one big holiday on Gimel Tammuz. Why not? That wasn't that way though. Little by little, things unfolded. We're going to see how this is relevant to life, to our life, how things unfold. First of all, there was the beginning, Gimel Tammuz, that the Rebbe got out of actual prison. Then after that, there was, after a few days, there was Yud Beis Tammuz, right? 9 days later. And then there was Yud Gimel Tammuz, 10 days later. And then they let him free. Why not, if it was a miracle, why not just do it at one time? Giving of the Torah was at one time. The Jews got out of Egypt, it was at one time, one holiday. Why do we have here a holiday that we celebrate? The Rebbe was actually freed on the 12th day, but really the holiday was 10 days before. It began before. Why schlep it all the time? Why? It says even more. The fact is that even after the 12th and the 13th day of Tammuz, as the Rebbe, true, he wasn't in prison anymore and he wasn't in exile, but he was in Russia. He was in Russia, and at any time they wanted to, they could hunt him down, no problem, and put him back into prison. And in fact, the Yevseksia, the Jews that put him into the communist Jews that put him into prison, they wanted desperately to get him put back. They were tremendously disappointed that he was released, to the point that he even had to run away from them. He had to move his dwellings to, it says, to some sort of a city outside of Leningrad, that he would be sort of not so conspicuous. It wasn't a total victory in Russia. Like we can see actually that what Shenotru Az Gezerah shown us there were still a lot of decrees on the Rebbe and on the Jewish people in that country until the Balagula, he had to run away from there. It says that in 19, shortly after he was released, right, he was released in Tammuz. So shortly in the beginning of the next year, a couple months later, he ran away from Russia. He was actually evicted from Russia. He said they didn't really want to leave his Hasidim, but they pushed anyway. But he was put out of Russia, and there were many years after that, and only now, says the Rebbe, 1990, Lamaila Mishishim Shana, more than 60 years, Ro'im, we can see the results from this redemption. That all of a sudden came Gorbachev, was in 1990, and he just said no more Iron Curtain, no more communism. The Gula, the Kol Ben Israel, all the Jewish people got out of that country. And certainly the order in this is like this, that the Gula and the redemption, it came in stages. Hu b'hashkacha pratis, the fact that it came in all sorts of stages. First, the Rebbe was imprisoned, then he was sentenced to death, then they made a mistake. So that was already a little bit of the beginning. And then after that, he was released from prison. They sent him into exile. That was on the third day of Tammuz. And then they said, you can leave. But he didn't get his papers yet. That was the 12th. And on the 13th, he got his papers. Then he was freed from Russia. Then after that, he had to run away from Russia. He had to leave Russia. He got out of Russia, and then he went to Poland. And then afterwards, he came to America. He started. And only now did actually communism fall in 1990 that the Iron Curtain fell. I said the Rebbe, this is all because of the previous Rebbe, but this must have been, this is all the workings of God. Why does God do things in such a, drawn out way? If it's a miracle, let it be a miracle. God is not limited by time. And especially this is talking about the imprisonment and the freeing of the Nasi Yisrael, of the head of the Jewish people. This is a redemption, a freedom for all of the Jews in the whole world. Just like the previous Rebbe wrote. He wrote about it later. Not only am I being freed from prison on the 12th of Tammuz, but also all of the people who love the Torah, namely doing the commandments, and even those Jews that are just called Jews, they don't want to leave the name Jew. I've brought freedom to all of them. Why did it happen in stages? Okay, we're going to do this tomorrow, but it says on the third day of Tammuz, many generations before that, there was another miracle, and that was the miracle of Joshua. Shemesh beGivon Dom. This is the sun. In Givon, it stood still. Beyidom Hashemesh, the sun became quiet until Joshua defeated his enemy. We'll talk about the second miracle. Actually, that was the first miracle, happened thousands of years before. How is that connected to the Gimmel Tammuz, that the Rebbe was freed from prison and sent into exile? We'll talk about that, God willing, tomorrow. And now the Yom Yom. 1 second. Let me do this a different way here. 1 minute. Here we go. Yom Yom. Oh, there we go.